My daughter handed me a silver pen and told me I was signing health insurance papers for my retirement, but she was actually signing my life away to a cold, state-run facility. At 72 years old, I watched as a rusted white transport van pulled into our driveway in Scarsdale, carrying away the last 40 years of my dignity in a single weathered suitcase. They thought I was just a broken old man with a stack of dusty school records, but they forgot that a teacher's greatest legacy is the powerful people he once helped create. My name is Arthur Bennett, and for 38 years, I stood at the front of a classroom in a struggling district outside of Chicago, teaching children that integrity was worth more than gold. I spent my life living in a modest brick house on Oak Street, the same home where my late wife, Martha, and I raised our only daughter, Sarah, with everything we had. After Martha passed away 3 years ago, I became Sarah's entire world, or at least that is what I told myself as I watched her plan a wedding far beyond her modest means. Sarah fell for a man named Julian, an ambitious corporate climber who viewed my retirement savings and my home's equity as his personal stepping stone into the elite circles of New York. When they asked me to sell the Oak Street house to fund their $200,000 wedding and a down payment on a Manhattan penthouse, I didn't hesitate to sign the deed over. I convinced myself that a small guest room in their luxury apartment would be plenty of space for a retired teacher who only needed his books and the company of his only child. The wedding was a lavish affair at a historic hotel, filled with Julian's wealthy associates, while I sat at a back table, feeling like a ghost in a tuxedo I couldn't afford. Sarah looked beautiful, but every time our eyes met, I saw a flicker of shame as if my calloused hands and sensible shoes didn't fit the high society image she was trying to build. Once we moved into the city, the guest room felt less like a home and more like a storage closet where they kept the inconvenient parts of a past they wanted to forget. Julian was promoted to a senior vice president role within 6 months, and suddenly, my presence at the dinner table became a strategic liability for his carefully curated image of modern success. He started suggesting that I eat my meals in the kitchen before their friends arrived, claiming that the smells of my traditional cooking were too strong for their sophisticated Manhattan social circle. Sarah stayed silent during these humiliations, staring at her expensive smartphone, while her husband treated the man who paid for their roof like an unwanted intruder in his own investment. I spent my afternoons walking through Central Park, sitting on the same green bench every day, wondering how the little girl I taught to read had become a stranger in silk. One Tuesday evening, Julian placed a stack of legal documents on the marble kitchen island and told me that the city's new safety regulations required me to sign for my Medicare. I trusted my daughter when she nodded and told me it was just a formality to ensure I had the best medical care available as I reached my mid-70s in the city. I didn't read the fine print because I never imagined that my own flesh and blood would use a legal loophole to declare me a ward of the state against my will. The next morning, while Sarah was at her Pilates class, 2 men in gray uniforms knocked on the door and told me I had 20 minutes to pack my essentials for transport. Julian stood by the window, refusing to look at me, as he handed the men a folder containing the papers I had signed only 12 hours earlier in a state of exhaustion. They didn't take me to a luxury retirement community with gardens and libraries, but to a crumbling brick building in a remote corner of the county where the paint was peeling. Meadowview Manor was a place where hope went to die, filled with the smell of industrial bleach and the quiet sobs of elderly residents who had also been discarded like old furniture. My room was a 10 by 10 box with a single window facing a parking lot, and the mattress was so thin I could feel the cold metal of the frame against my spine. I tried to call Sarah's cell phone 30 times that first night, but every attempt went straight to a recorded message telling me that the number was no longer in service. The facility director was a man with cold eyes who informed me that my daughter had prepaid for 3 months of the lowest tier care and requested no further contact from me. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my old leather suitcase, finding nothing but a few changes of clothes and my most precious possession, an old teacher's ledger. This ledger contained the names, grades, and personal notes of every student who had passed through my classroom over nearly 4 decades of service in the public school system of Illinois. As the weeks passed, I grew weak from the poor nutrition and the lack of sunlight, my hands shaking as I turned the yellowed pages of the book that held my life. I stopped eating the gray mash they called dinner spending my hours staring at a name I had underlined in red ink 25 years ago. Leo Miller, the boy who struggled. Leo was a foster child who came to my class with holes in his shoes and a defensive wall around his heart that no other adult had been able to successfully climb. I used my own lunch money to buy him sneakers and stayed late every afternoon for 3 years to make sure he understood that his mind was his only ticket out of poverty. On a Thursday afternoon, a fleet of black SUVs pulled into the cracked parking lot of Meadowview, and a group of men in tailored suits stepped out with heavy clipboards. The staff at the facility began frantically cleaning the hallways, terrified because the new owner of the national healthcare conglomerate was arriving for a surprise inspection of the regional sites. I was sitting in the common room, clutching my ledger to my chest, when the heavy double doors swung open and a tall, powerful man walked into the dim, flickering light. He was lecturing the facility manager about the unacceptable state of the flooring and the lack of proper ventilation when his eyes suddenly locked onto mine across the crowded room. The air in the room seemed to freeze as the billionaire stopped mid-sentence, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the linoleum as he walked directly toward my small, plastic chair. The manager tried to intercept him, claiming I was a confused resident who didn't belong in the main area. But the powerful man pushed past him without a single word of acknowledgement. He stopped 2 feet away from me, his breath hitching as he looked at the old ledger in my lap, and then up at the face of the man who saved him. To the shock of the nurses and the terrified administrators, the most powerful man in the state dropped to his knees on the dirty floor and took my thin hands in his. "Mr. Bennett, I have spent the last 15 years looking for you so I could tell you that I finally became the man you promised I could be," he whispered. Leo Miller looked at my hospital gown and the plastic identification bracelet on my wrist, and I saw a flash of absolute, cold fury ignite behind his intelligent, dark blue eyes. He stood up and turned to his assistants, ordering them to call his private medical team and his lead attorney immediately while he kept a protective hand on my frail shoulder. Within an hour, I was being carried out of that hellhole on a private stretcher, surrounded by the best security detail money could buy, leaving the stunned facility manager in silence. Leo sat beside me in the back of his darkened limousine, explaining that he now owned over 200 senior living centers, but he had never forgotten the teacher from Oak Street. He took me to his penthouse, a space 3 times larger than the one Sarah lived in, where a team of private doctors began restoring my health with care and genuine respect. Once I was strong enough to speak without trembling, I told him the full story of the silver pen, the insurance papers, and the daughter who had traded me for status. Leo didn't just offer me a room. He offered me a seat at the head of his charitable foundation, giving me the resources to help thousands of students just like him. But before we settled into our new life, Leo asked his legal team to perform a deep audit of the Manhattan penthouse where Sarah and Julian were currently living their lie. It turned out that the insurance papers Julian had forced me to sign also included a power of attorney that he had used to embezzle my remaining retirement funds. Leo's lawyers moved with the precision of a scalpel, filing a massive fraud lawsuit and freezing every account connected to Julian's name within 48 hours of my rescue from Meadowview. One morning, Sarah arrived at Leo's corporate headquarters, dressed in a designer suit, hoping to secure a multi-million-dollar investment for Julian's failing luxury real estate development firm. She was kept waiting in the lobby for 4 hours, ignored by the receptionists, until a security guard finally escorted her to the top-floor executive boardroom for a brief meeting. When the heavy mahogany doors opened, she didn't see a young CEO waiting to sign a check, but her father sitting in a high-backed leather chair at the head table. The color drained from her face as she realized that the useless old teacher she had discarded was now the person who held the power to destroy her husband's career. Julian tried to bluster his way through an apology, claiming it was all a big misunderstanding and that they had been planning to come get me once the renovations were done. I didn't raise my voice or show any anger. I simply slid a copy of the fraud charges across the table and told them they had exactly 1 week to vacate. Since the down payment for their apartment had come from the illegal sale of my home, Leo's legal team had successfully petitioned the court to revert the title back to me. Sarah began to cry, begging me to remember that we were family, but I looked at her with the same steady gaze I used on students who tried to cheat. Family doesn't sign each other away to die in the dark, Sarah, I said quietly, feeling the weight of the golden ledger in my lap as a reminder of true loyalty. They were escorted out of the building by security, their names blacklisted from every major social club and professional firm in the city thanks to Leo's far-reaching influence. Julian was fired from his vice president position the next day when the news of the fraud investigation hit the industry journals, leaving them with nothing but their pride. I didn't take the money for myself. I instructed Leo to liquidate the Manhattan penthouse and use every cent to build a scholarship fund for underprivileged children in my old neighborhood. I moved into a beautiful, sunlit cottage on Leo's estate, where I spend my mornings gardening and my afternoons mentoring the bright young minds that the foundation supports every year. Leo visits me every Sunday evening, and we sit on the porch talking about literature and the lessons he learned in that small classroom 25 years ago in Illinois. I sometimes receive letters from Sarah, mailed from a small apartment in a town she hates, but I no longer feel the sting of the betrayal that nearly broke my spirit. Justice is not always about revenge. Sometimes it is simply about the world finally recognizing the value of a person who spent their entire life giving to others without asking. I have my dignity back, my health has returned, and I am surrounded by people who see me as a mentor and a friend rather than a burden to be hidden. The old ledger sits on my mahogany desk, its pages a map of a life well lived, proving that the seeds of kindness we plant today will always find their way back. My name is Arthur Bennett. I am 72 years old, and I have finally learned that the most expensive wedding in the world cannot buy a single ounce of genuine human loyalty. I look out over the gardens and see a group of students arriving for their summer workshop, and I realize that my classroom never actually closed. It just got much bigger. The silver pen that once signed me away is long gone, replaced by the steady hand of a man who knows exactly who he is and where he truly belongs now. I am home, I am respected, and for the first time in a very long time, I am looking forward to seeing what the next chapter of this story will bring. Julian's attempts to hide his assets in offshore accounts were quickly thwarted by Leo's high-tech security team, who traced every dollar back to the retirement fund he had stolen from me during the winter. My daughter sent a series of increasingly desperate emails, claiming that she was a victim of Julian's manipulation and that she never truly understood the legal implications of the documents she made me sign. She begged for a private meeting at a coffee shop, promising to explain everything if I would only tell Leo to stop the aggressive legal proceedings that were currently destroying their social standing. I remembered the cold rain hitting the window of the transport van as I was driven away from the only life I knew, and I deleted her messages without feeling a single shred of guilt. Leo's legal department discovered that Julian had been using my stolen house equity to fund a secret lifestyle that involved expensive gambling debts and a luxury apartment for a woman Sarah didn't know. When the evidence of Julian's infidelity was delivered to Sarah's temporary rental, the walls of her perfect world finally came crashing down, proving that her marriage was built on nothing but stolen sand. She showed up at the gates of Leo's estate at midnight, screaming my name through the intercom until the local police were called to escort her away from the property for trespassing and harassment. I watched the flashing blue lights from my bedroom window, feeling a profound sense of sadness for the woman she had become, but knowing that the cycle of her greed had to end. The next morning, Leo sat with me over breakfast and explained that the Golden Ledger Project was officially launching, with a mission to find and support retired teachers who had been abandoned by society. We spent hours going through my old records, identifying colleagues who had dedicated their lives to the youth of Chicago but were now living in poverty or neglected facilities across the state of Illinois. My first mission was to find Mrs. Gable, the woman who taught me how to be a mentor, who was now living in a cramped basement apartment because her son had spent her entire pension. When we arrived with a team of movers and a contract for a new life, the look of disbelief on her face reminded me why I had spent 40 years in a crowded public school classroom. Leo provided the funding for a state-of-the-art retirement community specifically for educators, ensuring that the people who built the future would never have to worry about a roof over their heads again. While I was busy building a legacy for my peers, Julian was formally indicted on charges of grand larceny and financial elder abuse, with the Manhattan District Attorney seeking the maximum possible prison sentence. Sarah attempted to testify against him to save herself, but the paper trail proved that she had actively participated in the deception by convincing me that the nursing home papers were actually insurance forms. The socialites who once invited her to every gala in the city now crossed the street to avoid her, leaving her isolated in a world where her only currency had been a stolen reputation. I received a call from a public defender telling me that Sarah was facing 3 years of probation and a massive restitution order that would take her the rest of her life to pay back. She had to take a job working at a local diner, the very kind of place she used to mock when she was living in her Manhattan penthouse and wearing $5,000 designer silk dresses. Every time I thought about her struggling to make rent, I had to remind myself of the thin mattress and the smell of bleach in the facility where she had left me to rot. Leo's foundation grew rapidly, and soon I was traveling across the country to speak at education conferences about the importance of protecting our seniors and valuing the wisdom of the older generation of Americans. I met thousands of former students who recognized me from the news, each one sharing a story of how a small act of kindness in my classroom had changed the entire trajectory of their lives. One afternoon, I walked into a small park in New Jersey and saw Julian sitting on a bench, his expensive suit replaced by a worn-out jacket, looking like a man who had lost everything. He didn't see me, and I didn't stop to talk to him, because there was nothing left to say to a man who viewed human beings as nothing more than numbers on a balance sheet. I realized then that the greatest punishment for people like Julian and Sarah wasn't just the loss of money, but the absolute loss of the respect they had worked so hard to falsely manufacture. Leo asked me to move into a permanent suite at the Foundation's headquarters, but I chose to stay in my small cottage, surrounded by my books and the garden I had finally started planting. The seasons changed, and the pain in my heart began to dull, replaced by a deep sense of purpose as I watched the first group of retired teachers move into their new, dignified homes. I made sure that every room had a library and a space for music, things that Julian had told me were unnecessary luxuries for a man of my age and my supposedly declining mental state. Sarah eventually sent me a video message, her face pale and her eyes tired, asking for a small loan so she could fix her car and get to her shift at the diner on time. I thought about the silver pen and the way she smiled as she lied to my face, and I decided to send her a list of local charities instead of the money she wanted. Forgiveness is a journey, but it does not mean allowing the person who hurt you to have a seat at your table while they are still holding the knife they used to stab you. Leo's success continued to soar, and he often told the press that his business philosophy was based entirely on the lessons of integrity and hard work he had learned in my 6th grade class. The Golden Ledger became a symbol of hope for thousands, and I felt like I was finally finishing the work I had started all those years ago in that drafty school building in Chicago. One evening, I found an old photo of Sarah as a child, holding a trophy she had won at a science fair, and I cried for the loss of the girl she used to be. I realized that the betrayal was not just a crime against me, but a crime against the version of herself that I had spent 20 years trying to nurture and protect with my love. I placed the photo back into the ledger, a reminder that even the most beautiful seeds can grow into something unrecognizable if they are nourished by nothing but greed and cold-hearted ambition. Leo's team found several more of Julian's victims, including an elderly widow in Connecticut who had lost her family farm to one of his predatory real estate schemes 3 years prior. We were able to use the frozen assets from the fraud case to return her land, and the sight of her standing in her own fields again felt like a victory for all of us. Justice was moving slowly, but it was moving with an undeniable weight, crushing the lies that Julian and Sarah had built their entire lives upon during their time in New York City. I began writing my memoirs, focusing not on the betrayal, but on the thousands of children I had taught and the incredible things they had gone through to find their own paths in life. The book became a bestseller, and the proceeds went directly into the scholarship fund, ensuring that even more children from struggling neighborhoods would have a chance to succeed like Leo Miller did. Sarah tried to sue for a portion of the book's earnings, claiming that her life story was part of the narrative, but the judge dismissed her case within 5 minutes of the initial hearing. She was ordered to pay my legal fees, which meant she had to take a second job working nights at a warehouse, finally understanding the physical exhaustion that she had once found so beneath her. I felt a strange sense of peace knowing that she was finally learning the value of a dollar and the reality of hard work, lessons I had failed to teach her when I was younger. Julian's trial lasted 2 weeks, and when the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all 24 counts, he collapsed in the courtroom, his mask of arrogance finally shattered into 1,000 pieces. He was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, a far cry from the luxury condos and high-end restaurants he had envisioned for his future as a Manhattan real estate mogul. Sarah watched the sentencing from the back of the courtroom, her designer clothes replaced by a cheap department store outfit, looking like a ghost of the woman who had once stood at the altar. She tried to catch my eye as I walked out of the courthouse with Leo, but I kept my gaze forward, focusing on the bright sunlight and the fresh air of a brand new day. I had spent enough of my life looking back at the wreckage of my family, and it was finally time to look forward to the community I was building with the people who cared. Leo bought me a small boat, and we spent Saturday afternoons on the lake, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the kind of friendship that only comes from years of mutual respect. I realized that family is not always a matter of blood. Sometimes it is a matter of who stands by you when the world is falling apart and who helps you pick up the pieces. My name is Arthur Bennett, and I am no longer the man who was tricked into a nursing home, but the man who helped a billionaire change the world for the better every day. The Golden Ledger is full of names now, each one representing a life that has been restored and a story that has been given a second chance at a happy and dignified ending. I often think about the silver pen, not as a weapon used against me, but as the instrument that eventually led me to a life far more meaningful than I ever could have imagined. Sarah's diner closed down, and she moved to a different state to try and start over, but the reputation of her betrayal followed her like a shadow that she could never quite escape. I hope that one day she finds the person she was meant to be, but I also know that I cannot be the one to guide her through that difficult and painful process of growth. Leo's Foundation is now the largest provider of senior educator housing in the country, and I am proud to be the face of an organization that values wisdom over wealth every single time. I sit in my garden and watch the birds, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin and the quiet joy of a life that is finally being lived on my own terms. My health has never been better, and the doctors say that my heart is strong, bolstered by the love and the respect of the community that has grown around me in this place. I am 72 years old, and I have learned that the greatest reversal in life is not finding wealth, but finding the strength to walk away from the people who do not value you. Every morning, I open my ledger and read the notes I made 25 years ago, reminded that every child has the potential to become a hero if someone just believes in them enough. I am a teacher, a mentor, and a survivor, and I am finally living the life that my wife, Martha, would have wanted for me when we first started our journey together so long ago. The Manhattan penthouse is a distant memory now, replaced by the solid ground of a home where I am loved and where my presence is seen as a gift rather than a burden. I have everything I need, and for the first time in my life, I am not afraid of the future or the challenges that may come my way as I continue to grow older. Julian's name is never mentioned in my house, and Sarah's letters remain unopened in a box in the attic, a part of my history that no longer has the power to hurt me anymore. I am surrounded by the laughter of the students who come to the estate for our summer programs, and their energy keeps me young and focused on the work that still needs doing. Leo often tells me that I am the father he never had, and I tell him that he is the son who showed me what true loyalty and gratitude look like in a world of greed. We are a family in every sense of the word, built on a foundation of shared struggle and the unwavering belief that justice will always find a way to prevail in the end. The Golden Ledger is more than just a book of names. It is a testament to the power of the human spirit and the enduring legacy of a teacher who never gave up. I am Arthur Bennett, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be, living a life of dignity, purpose, and profound peace in the heart of a country I love so much. The sun is setting over the lake, and I feel a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that brought me here, even the parts that were filled with pain and betrayal at first. I am ready for whatever comes next, knowing that I have the respect of my peers and the love of a man who remembered the lessons I taught him so long ago. The story is not over yet, but the chapters of suffering are finally behind me, replaced by a narrative of hope and the triumph of a good man over a cruel and heartless world. I pick up my pen, not to sign a document I haven't read, but to write the next lesson for the children who will one day lead this country with the same integrity I taught Leo. I am home, I am safe, and I am finally free from the shadows of a past that tried to consume me, but only succeeded in making me stronger and more resilient than ever. The ledger is open, the ink is wet, and the future is waiting for me to write the next page of a life that has finally found its true and honest purpose. Julian's letters from prison arrived weekly, filled with hollow apologies and desperate pleas for me to drop the civil lawsuits, but I handed them to Leo's legal team without reading a single word. I decided to sell the Oak Street house and donate the entire proceeds to the local library, finally letting go of the physical walls that once held the memories of my old life. I stood on the stage of the National Education Summit, looking out at 5,000 teachers who were finally being recognized for the invisible work they do every single day of their lives. Sarah was spotted working at a gas station in a small town 3 states away, her name scrubbed from the social registers of New York as if she had never existed at all. The legal team finally settled the remaining civil suits against Julian's former firm, ensuring that every penny he embezzled from my accounts was returned with interest to the foundation's growing scholarship fund. I spent my mornings sitting in the library of the new community center, watching retired educators teach reading skills to neighborhood children who reminded me so much of the boy Leo used to be. One rainy afternoon, I found an old letter Sarah wrote when she was 10, promising to take care of me forever, and I realized that greed is a slow poison that changes the heart. I realized that the Golden Ledger was no longer just my old grade book, but a living testament to the thousands of lives that had been touched by simple acts of patience and guidance. Leo's influence allowed us to pass a new state law protecting seniors from financial exploitation, ensuring that no other parent would ever be tricked by a silver pen and a lie again. Sarah called one last time from a payphone, her voice cracking as she asked if I still had her childhood stuffed bear, the one thing she had forgotten in her rush to escape. I told her I had donated it to a children's shelter months ago, along with everything else she left behind, because I could no longer hold on to things that reminded me of her betrayal. She stayed silent for a long minute before hanging up, and I knew that was the last time I would ever hear the voice of the daughter I had once loved more than life. I officially opened the Martha Bennett wing of the new facility, a place dedicated to the wives and mothers who support the educators who spend their lives building the future of this country. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the teacher who the world forgot, but I didn't feel forgotten at all as I sat in my garden surrounded by my former students. Julian's appeals were all denied by the higher courts, leaving him to serve the full length of his sentence in a facility that was ironically just as cold as Meadowview Manor had been. I took a trip back to the school where I taught for 38 years, and they had renamed the auditorium after me, a gesture that brought tears to my tired but happy eyes. The principal told me that my old classroom was now the most popular in the school, filled with new technology and students who knew my story and the legend of the Golden Ledger. Leo asked me to be the godfather to his newborn son, and when I held that baby in my arms, I felt a connection to the future that I thought Sarah had stolen. I named the boy after the teacher who had inspired me when I was a child, closing the circle of mentorship that had sustained me through the darkest nights of my lonely life. We built a park where the old nursing home used to stand, replacing the smell of bleach and the feeling of despair with the laughter of children and the scent of fresh roses. I spent a quiet evening looking at the stars, thinking about Martha and how proud she would be to see that our life's work was finally being used to help so many people. The betrayal that almost killed me had become the catalyst for a movement that was changing the way the entire country viewed the elderly and the people who have dedicated their lives. I realized that my daughter's greatest mistake was thinking that my value was tied to my bank account, rather than the thousands of seeds I had planted in the minds of my students. Every Sunday, a different former student comes to visit me at the cottage, bringing their children and their stories of success, proving that a teacher's influence truly never ends in this world. I have stopped checking the news for updates on Sarah and Julian, because their story is a closed book while mine is just beginning a beautiful and much more meaningful new chapter. The foundation received a massive anonymous donation, which we used to provide free healthcare for retired teachers who had been abandoned by their families, just like I was on that Tuesday. I watched a documentary about the impact of the Golden Ledger, and seeing Leo speak about our journey made me realize that some bonds are far stronger than the ones of biological blood. I began to mentor a young man who reminded me of Leo, a foster child with a brilliant mind and a difficult past who just needed someone to believe in him for once. The state governor invited me to dinner to discuss the future of education, and I sat at the table with the same dignity and grace I had always used in my classroom. I told the governor that the secret to a great nation is not in its buildings or its money, but in the way it treats the people who have nothing left to give. I received a postcard from Sarah with no return address, simply saying, "I'm sorry," but I knew that some words are spoken too late to mend a heart that has already moved on. I placed the postcard in a box with the rest of the past, acknowledging her apology but choosing to remain in the light of the present rather than the shadows of her regret. Leo's company became the most ethical healthcare provider in the nation, proving that you can be successful and powerful without losing your soul to the pursuit of gold and social status. I sat on my porch and watched the sunset, feeling a sense of peace that I had never known in the years when I was trying to please a daughter who never cared. The Golden Ledger is now a digital database used by thousands of schools to track the success of their alumni, ensuring that no student is ever truly lost to the cracks of society. I held a small ceremony for the teachers who had passed away before they could see the changes we made, placing their names in the ledger as a permanent mark of their service. I realized that my life was a masterpiece of resilience, painted with the strokes of both pain and joy, and I was finally ready to sign the bottom with a steady hand. Sarah was fired from the gas station for stealing and moved again, her life becoming a series of desperate choices that I could no longer fix for her no matter how I felt. I chose to focus my energy on the students who were currently in my care, teaching them that the choices they make today will determine the kind of people they become tomorrow. I am Arthur Bennett, a man who survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged with a heart that is bigger and stronger than it was before the transport van arrived at my door. The children at the foundation call me the grandfather of teachers, a title that means more to me than any degree or professional award I have ever received in my long career. Leo and I walked through the new campus, and he told me that he finally felt like he had repaid the debt he owed me for those sneakers 25 years ago in Illinois. I told him that he had paid it back 1,000 times over, not with money, but with the loyalty and the love that he had shown me when I was at my lowest. The silver pen that Sarah used to trick me was eventually found in the trash of the penthouse, and Leo had it encased in glass as a reminder of what greed can do. It sits in the lobby of the foundation, a warning to everyone who enters that integrity is the only thing that truly lasts in a world where everything else can be taken away. I wrote the final chapter of my memoir, titled The Return of the Teacher, and I sent the manuscript to a publisher who had been waiting for my story for a long time. The book was dedicated to Martha, Leo, and every student who ever walked through my door with a dream and a desire to learn something new about the world they live in. I spent a quiet Christmas with Leo and his family, sitting by the fire and feeling the warmth of a home that was built on a foundation of genuine love and respect. I didn't miss the lavish parties of Manhattan or the cold stares of Julian's associates. I only missed the simple joy of being exactly where I was meant to be in life. Sarah's name was mentioned in a small news clip about a local fraud ring, and I felt a brief pang of sorrow before returning to the book I was reading to Leo's son. I have learned that you cannot save people who do not want to be saved, but you can always provide a lighthouse for those who are searching for a way back home. I am 75 years old now, and my eyes are still sharp enough to see the potential in a child's eyes and the beauty in a sunset over the lake every evening. The Golden Ledger is nearly full, and I have started a second volume to hold the names of the next generation of students who will change the world for the better. I have no regrets about the path I took, even the parts that led through the gates of Meadowview Manor, because they led me back to the person I was always meant to be. My daughter's betrayal was a tragedy, but the rescue by Leo was a miracle that proved that the universe always finds a way to balance the scales of justice in the end. I sit in the garden and think about the boy with the holes in his shoes, and I smile knowing that he is now the man who is protecting the entire world. The legacy of a teacher is not measured in the money they make, but in the number of lives they change, and by that measure, I am the wealthiest man in the entire country. I have found a quiet dignity in my older years, a strength that comes from knowing that I have lived a life of purpose and that I have remained true to myself. The Manhattan Penthouse is now a community center for the arts, a place where people from all walks of life can come together to create something beautiful for their city. I am Arthur Bennett, and I am a teacher, a father, a mentor, and a friend, and I am finally living a life that is as golden as the ledger I hold. I am no longer afraid of the dark or the cold, because I am surrounded by the light of the people I have helped and the warmth of a true family. Sarah's path is hers to walk, and while I hope she finds peace, I have finally stopped trying to walk it for her at the expense of my own sanity and health. Julian's prison cell is a small world, while my world has grown to include the entire nation and the thousands of lives that the foundation touches every single day of the week. I pick up my pen, a simple wooden one this time, and I write a note to a student who is struggling, telling them to never give up on themselves or their dreams. The ink flows easily onto the page, just like the words of this story, which has finally found its way to a conclusion that is filled with hope and quiet victory. I am Arthur Bennett, 75, living in a cottage of my own making, and I have never been more certain of the power of kindness and the strength of the truth. The sun has set, the stars are out, and the world is quiet and peaceful as I close the ledger for the night and prepare for a brand new day of work. I am home, I am safe, and I am loved by more people than I can count, and that is the only ending that truly matters in a life well lived for others. I have learned that the greatest gift you can give is your time, and the greatest gift you can receive is the knowledge that you made a difference in someone's life. The classroom is quiet now, but the lessons go on forever, carried in the hearts of the students who will one day become the teachers for the next generation of children. I am Arthur Bennett, and this is my story, a story of betrayal, rescue, and the enduring power of a teacher's love for his students and the truth of the world. The ledger is closed, but the life it represents is still very much alive and well in the hearts of everyone who has ever been touched by its golden pages. I look at the photo of Martha and I whisper, "We did it," knowing that she is watching over me and the beautiful community we have built together in her honor. I am ready for the next chapter, whatever it may be, because I know that I have the strength to face it with the same integrity I have always shown. I am Arthur Bennett, a retired teacher, a billionaire's mentor, and a man who has finally found the peace and the dignity he deserves after a lifetime of hard work.